Our first text comes from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 58, verses 1 through 12. We open with the words of the Lord. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, and to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on the fast day and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house when you see them naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you shall rise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the house to live in. The word of the Lord. Any of you who has, at any time, been a teenage girl will recognize the pleading tone that lies behind Isaiah 58. It is the pleading, the imploring of a self-righteous 15-year-old who just has to go out tonight, Mom, because I've done all my chores, and I love you, and you are the best mom, and come on. And any parent will recognize a rhetorical device that Isaiah reports straight from the mouth of God. Is this not the obedience that I choose, to loose the mugs from the dishwasher, to undo the chaos of your room, to let your laundry be folded? Is it not to contribute to the overall well-being of my household, and to be kind to your brother when he inevitably does something absurd? Then my house shall be clean. Then order will be restored. Then the neighbors will see that I have done it. You shall call and be able to stay out past midnight. You shall cry for allowance, and I will provide. We have in Isaiah the story of a petulant child. Judah returned from exile in Babylon, who, having time and again refused the right ordering of God's household, fails nonetheless to understand God's perceived absence in their lives. All the signifiers are there. They've cleaned the dishes. Their rooms are neat ish, and no one is screaming. But the thing signified, the true ordering of the household, which for Isaiah is worship that extends into the social economy, is missing. To be fair, the Judeans, like most 15-year-old girls, had undoubtedly legitimate complaints. After all, theirs was a community in turmoil. Only recently rescued by the Persian Emperor Cyrus, the people to whom Isaiah made his pronouncement have lived in a constant state of anxiety, from which they have only now been partially delivered. It was enough to question God's commitment to the chosen. Why, they cry, do we fast, but you do not see? And God's response bellows. The sign petulant Judah presents, their fasting, does not correspond to the reality, to the spirit of God's desire for community. They fast because they have to and because it seems like the right thing to do, not because there is any value, any social good in the fasting. And God is fed up. Shout out, God calls to Isaiah. Do not hold back. Announce to my people their rebellion and to the house of Jacob their sins. God's righteous anger seeps off the page with satisfying clarity. But the pronouncement that follows should set preacher folk like me and church folk like y'all on edge. God's target here is not the unreligious, those for whom God is far away. In fact, it rarely is. No, God's target is the hyper-religious, the spiritual, the seekers and the everyday pew fillers. Day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways. They're showing up in the synagogues. They are fasting and confessing and humbling themselves in prayers of contrition and acts of penitence. They are seeking and delighting. They want to know God, to see God day by day by day by day. And don't we? How often have we too, from our seats in the sanctuary, cried out, have we not done all we can? We have fasted on the feast days. We have humbled ourselves before this very table. We have tithed our 10%. We have served our session appointments. We have read the bulletin from cover to cover. Where are you? Though it may not be the threat of the Babylonian captivity, we too have seen our economies fail and flail. Our houses of government co-opted by self-serving lobbies and politicians. Our access to affordable health care and education dwindle. We have seen prices inflate as jobs are lost. We've seen our own families disrupted by death and depression and anxiety and terminal illness and divorce and a myriad of maladies. And as if that is not enough, the world around us crumbles. Ukraine is under threat. Syria is under threat. Muslims in France are under threat. Christians in China are under threat. The sword of Damocles looms high, strung by a thread over us all. Why humble ourselves, but you don't notice? We are not so far from those petulant teenagers, we for whom worship is often an act of self-service, a place to see and be seen, a thing to check off the to-do list. We who believe that God could be bought by our fasting and our flattery. We're showing up. But we, like the Judeans, are only looking inside our symbols. We want to know God in the walls. God confined to the idea, to the image. We want the praise and the pomp. Easy on the righteousness. Hold the mercy. And God, channeling Alicia Silverstone as Cher Horowitz in the 1996 classic Clueless, shouts back, as if you practice righteousness, as if you did not constantly forsake, avoid, turn your back on my ordinance, my laws, my people, my desires for a rightly ordered, peaceable kingdom. God is measuring the gap between intention expressed in worship on the one hand and conduct outside of worship on the other. And the gap is widening with each act of penitence in the sanctuary that does not correspond to an act of mercy outside of the sanctuary's walls. So when from our pews we cry out that God is nowhere to be found, God cries back with a resounding look elsewhere. God is not in the walls, in the box, or in the ideas, or at least God is not only there. Lent is a season all about penitence. The ashes that we will wear today signify not only our mortality, but also our frailty. We admit to God and to one another that we have not done all we can. So during Lent, we give something up, or we take something on. But the empty fasts, which God admonished in Judah, are all too often the self-same empty calories of our own Lenten diets. Isaiah spells out an unfortunate truth for us in this season. Penitence, whatever form it takes, not done with an eye towards the world, is better left undone. If our fasting does not also feed the hungry, if our moratorium on shopping does not also clothe the naked, if our clean homes do not house the homeless, then our earnest acts are done in vain. We begin this season certain of the story's end. Jesus Christ, truly God and truly human, who in baptism clothed himself with the mantle of sin, has been walking resolutely toward death. And that death, like our own, is certain. Jesus will die. But on the third day, he's going to rise. And the terrifying, the liberating truth for we who populate the pews is that God in Jesus Christ is now on the move. The God who became human will no longer be confined by our beautiful sanctuary. That God is surely here, but not only here. That God walks the long road to Emmaus through Nicholtown and Sterling, and through Detroit and Compton, and occasionally, if we're lucky, down McDaniel Avenue and Augustus Circle. You look for me in the symbols. I am in the streets. God is calling us to reckon with the reality of the kingdom God has intended, not some Pollyanna utopia. God is calling us to imagine the world as it should be, as it could be, as it was created to be. God is calling us away from ourselves and toward the divine, but between God and us stand the poor and the orphans, the despondent widow and the naked and the homeless. Between God and us stand folks across this country fighting for equal rights and opportunities. And to get to God, we have got to walk alongside God's people. What good does our worship and our fasting do if it does not carry us outside of these halls and into the streets? For whom, then, is our fasting? Is it for our Facebook feeds? Is it for us? Is it for another member to see and envy our great discipline? Or is it for God and therefore for all of God's people? It is not that the worship or the fast, the Lenten discipline is to be disregarded. God calls us to worship, but in worship we are called to sacrifice. And if our piety, if our worship leads to a discipline that does not affect our world, it is a sign without a signified. If it does not drive our feet toward the places of deepest need in this community, in Greenville, South Carolina, then it is an empty vessel. And worse yet, it's meaningless to God. We must, and we should, and we do gather for worship. But that is just the beginning. Take comfort that our worship ends not with this benediction, but with the coming of the kingdom of God, in which we all take part. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. From their pews, God heard the Judeans. God heard them and called them to a greater good. And God will hear you. God does hear you, but you got to get out. And in responding to God's call, you too will be given a mantle that can change this world. Not moralizing, but mercy. This Lent, you can become a light, a repairer, a restorer of this broken, darkened world. People will come to this place because you have been out in God's world, doing God's work. Not the petulance of a teenager, but the satisfaction of a grateful child. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and He will say, "Here, here I am." Amen.